Hello, this is Claire Howell from the Skagit Fisheries Enhancement Group. Today we'll be doing our second video in the Salmon in the Studio series. So thank you for joining me. Let's get started. This will take place actually in the same creek as our previous video where the adult coho salmon were spawning, so where they were laying and fertilizing their eggs. But for this video, we're going to look at the development of the eggs. Alright, I'm just putting in some water so that my colors will be nice and smooth. It's a nice sandstone color. I need to slowly drop that in. And this is the base coat for our first rock. So these salmon eggs, they wouldn't be on top of the gravel. They would actually be buried underneath the gravel. So you might have remembered the gravel will help provide protection, shelter from predators as these little eggs develop. You can see when we look back at them, they're very fragile and delicate. They don't have any way to really defend themselves from something that might eat them. So their parents lay them nice and safe, buried in the creek underneath gravel. But for the purpose of this painting, I wanted to show you a little bit of the environment. So we're just going to pretend that we have a window into what's going on in the salmon red, buried in the gravel. Sometimes these fish and eggs can actually be a foot deep, so there wouldn't really be any light down there. So we had to use our imagination a bit for this painting. Here you can see one of the salmon eggs that hasn't hatched yet. So I'll start by putting some color into that. Remember, salmon eggs are those nice, pretty, bright orange, very pretty eggs. So I'll start by lightly putting a little orange layer in here. And you can see that there's something in the middle of this egg that I'm avoiding as I drop the color in. What might that be? So this is what your eggs looked like if you're part of the Salmon in the Classroom program when salmon were first brought to your class. And that little circle that you can see in the egg is actually the eye of the fish. So I'm going to very carefully put in some black, the pupil, and being very careful not to let that touch. This is the eye of a little baby fish growing inside the egg. A couple moments once this orange of the yolk of the egg has dried, I'll go through and I'll put in a little bit more shape of the baby fish. So here is what happens right after the egg has hatched. So the egg has a protective membrane, and that's what helps keep the baby embryo safe as it develops. And that membrane is actually quite strong. So if you were to pick up a salmon egg after this eyed phase, and if you accidentally dropped it, that egg wouldn't break. Instead, it would bounce. But when it's time for the fish to hatch, it's time for them to leave that membrane. So they produce a little enzyme, so it's like a little chemical to help break the membrane down, and they start to move around in there, and they break out. And they are what we call an alevin. It's like a larval stage where they're still attached to that yolk. So you can see the orange of the egg here because of the yolk. This is the yolk on the alevin. Get that orange in there. And this yolk has all of the nutrients, all the food that this baby fish needs. So it isn't ready to live and eat on its own yet. It's still going to stay in the nest, and it's still going to get all of its food from this yolk. But instead of being contained inside the membrane of the egg, now the alevin is going to be free in the gravel, And they can actually swim around in the gravel a little bit. They can burrow deeper in, they can move from one spot to another, but they will stay in the gravel because this bright orange yolk will make them very visible, and they're not very good at swimming yet, so they would not be able to escape from predators. So they still need the protection of the nest, the red. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then put in a little bit more detail of the rocks and a little bit more of the painting of the fish. So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the temperature of the creek water and the development of the egg in Alevin. So eggs will hatch sooner in warmer water temperatures. Actually, how we calculate or predict when an egg is going to hatch isn't based on the number of days that it has been developing, but is based on what we call acquired thermal units, or ATUs. So you can think of that as like how much heat that egg has experienced, because the egg needs a certain amount of heat in order to convert the energy, the nutrients from the yolk, into that developing fish. So to build the brain, the eyes, the spine, the heart, as that fish develops, it needs some temperature in the water, some heat, so that it can get the energy to do that. However, if it's too warm in the creek, because we know salmon want cold water, right? So if it's too warm, then that process will become wasteful. The salmon will need to use more of the energy stored in the yolk just to keep itself alive, rather than building up its organs, its body, and getting strong and ready to be successful in the creek. Now I'm going to paint the Alevin. See, there's a little light patch right on the side of the face. This pink here, this is the gill, so the Alevin's able to get oxygen directly from the water using those gills. And that's part of why the Alevin hatched out of the egg, because when he was curled up in the egg, he couldn't really get enough oxygen from the water to fuel his body as it's developing. So that's part of why they need to hatch out of the egg and don't complete their development totally inside of the egg. And here, what I'm coloring with this darker gray, this is where the brain of the fish is. I'm just going to carefully pull this darker gray down along the body so that it lightens out as I add more water. Alright. This fish is almost transparent at this state. It's a very delicate little larval fish. And it's part of why they have to stay in the nest, because they're just so delicate. Here we have this nice gray, adding a little bit of color to the body, but not too much because they're mostly clear. So they're just starting to grow out their fins. Here's the caudal fin or tail fin starting to develop. I think I'm going to let that rest for a moment. Kind of even out the colors here. And I left some white right along this blood vessel, and that white is the spine of the fish. Here's the Alevin with detail added. Still adding a little bit of smoothness to the bottom of the body here. There we go, you can see that blood vessel, and it looks like some of the spine's gotten covered. Let me smooth that out. Yeah, so on the fish, the first notable structures to develop that you could still see inside the egg were the eyes, the head, and that white line that I've hinted at in the shape of the fish in the egg is the spine. And so the salmon egg develops the same as really any embryo that's developing, where first cells form, and then the cells begin to divide and differentiate into different types of cells to create organs and then organ systems. Here we have the alevin. So the yolk sac is going to be providing food to the alevin as the fish continues to grow, and now it has access to more oxygen so that it can grow more completely, and it can also build up its muscles before it leaves the nest, the red, to go and hunt for food itself. Here you can see the yolk. It's the same yolk as gives the color of the orange to the salmon egg. And that yolk will be absorbed into the body over time as the fish uses the nutrients. So that yolk is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappears completely inside of the fish. And that is what we call buttoning up. So this fish will be entirely buttoned up once its yolk has been completely absorbed up into its belly. Here is our completed painting. We have the egg with the developing embryo. You can see the eye, the head with the brain, and a little bit of a stretch of that spine as it wraps around the egg. And here you can see the newly hatched larval fish, the alevin. Both the egg and the alevin are getting all of their food, all of their nutrients from that yolk. And as the alevin absorbs the yolk and uses all of that food, it'll start to fully develop its body, it'll develop its mouth, its fins, its teeth, and as that yolk gets fully absorbed, it will become time for that alevin to venture out of the red, at which point it will no longer be an alevin, but it will be the next stage of the salmon's life cycle, which we'll talk about in our next video. So both this developing egg and the alevin are going to stay in the nest, in the salmon red, safe underneath all of this gravel. And part of why they're going to do that is because this environment still has predators. Here's a predator that would love to eat either a disturbed egg, an alevin that's gotten washed out of the nest and up to the surface. This is an American dipper. So this is a diving bird that will typically jump into the water and swim around, turning over rocks and looking for aquatic insects. But if they were to happen upon an egg or an alevin, that bird would happily eat them up. So they have to stay safe in the red because they would be unable to defend themselves from predators. Alright, so I hope you'll join me in our next video where we'll learn about what happens once the alevin has completely absorbed its yolk and it's no longer an alevin, it's time for it to leave the nest. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time in our next Salmon in the Studio video. Thank you.